Well, here we are at the Marshall stage, the Marshall Theatre at the Factory, and we're very lucky today. We've been joined by Gary Moore. Gary, welcome to the Marshall Factory.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for coming to see us.
Pleasure.
Been a long friend of Marshall. You've come here for many years.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
When was your first association with Marshall?
Oh, back in Ireland, I got a 50-watt Marshall when I was 16. I was in my first band, Skid Row. I didn't have the speaker cabinet, unfortunately. The guy before me, who was the guitarist in the band, built this kind of 412 cabinet, like an angle cabinet, and he'd put Formica all over it. Okay. Yellow. Okay. Very lovely. And he put Goodman speakers in it. But it worked. I mean, the amp sounded great, so that was my first ever Marshall.
Excellent. That was a long time ago. And when was your first association with the Factory? I mean, you've been coming here for a long time, haven't you? You've known Mr. Marshall for a while. Yeah. So, do you remember when you first came to the Factory?
Oh, yeah. I first came here, I think, in 1980.
Oh, that's quite a while.
And I had a band called G-Force at the time, and I came up to order a load of gear. And I ordered... I had 3 heads, 300-watt heads, and 2 8x10 cabs, right. 2 4x15 cabs, and 2 4x12s. Wow. And I realised shortly after that you couldn't hear all the other speakers because they were too, the 415s, and that didn't really kind of. So I ended up just with 6 412s and 3 heads. Right. Naughty boy.
Excellent. Well, you just mentioned Skid Row, one of your first bands, and that was with Phil, wasn't it? Phil Lynott.
Yeah, he was the singer in Skid Row. He didn't play bass in those days. He didn't really take up the bass until after the bass player brushed threw him out of the band because he was having problems with his throat and his voice. So he chucked him out, and we continued as a 3-piece. And then Phil formed Thin Lizzy, and then he started playing the bass. Then he learned very quickly. Right.
Well, you worked a couple of times with Phil in Skid Row and then in Thin Lizzy as well.
Yeah, I was in Thin Lizzy 3 times actually, but the first 2 times were just really standing in for other guitarists who'd kind of absconded or cut their hands up or things like that. You know, like the first time Eric Bell walked off at the end of an Irish tour, well, halfway through an Irish tour, and he had a bit of a, I don't know, he almost had a breakdown, I think, and so they called me in the next day, and I finished the tour with him. Then I stayed with him for a few months, and then I kind of didn't really want to do it anymore, so I left the band and went on to work with John Heisman after that. Then I went back in 1977 when they did the big Queen tour of America because Brian Robertson cut his hand up in a fight. Right. And then they wanted me to stay, but I still had obligations to this other band I was in, Coliseum 2, and I wanted to give it one last shot, so I did that, and then I joined them as a full-time member in '79. We did the Black Rose album. Yeah. Yeah. Right, yeah.
Actually, I was going to ask you, actually, what's your favourite track you did with Phil? Because you did a couple of...
Parisienne Walkways.
I was going to say that was one of the first ones, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was outside of the band. The funny thing about that was I just went around to his house one night, and he was sort of sitting up in bed. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening. He didn't want to get up too early that day, you know, so I was playing his acoustic guitar and I played the melody, and he went, "Oh, that's great. Oh," he says, "I could write some lyrics to that." And I said, "Nah, it's an instrumental. I don't need no lyrics," you know, but he did it anyway. And we went in the studio and we were doing all weird things like we got an accordion to make it sound more French, you know, all this really cheesy stuff, and I'd be playing the notes and he'd be squeezing it. And then he got a stand-up bass and put chalk marks on the neck because I had no frets because he'd never done it, just for the intro, for the slide bit in the intro. And then we did like things like make the guitar sound like mandolins, playing them like very fast picking and stuff. It was a very quirky little record.
That was a great track, wasn't it? So.
Yeah, and on the night we were mixing it, Black Sabbath were in the studio, sitting behind me on a sofa, and Bill Ward was throwing up in a bucket at the end of the sofa, and Tony was sitting there, and it was the funniest night. We didn't know how to mix a record, Chris Tangredi, we were just sitting there, and, how's a record sound in the studio? Not a clue. And we just kept playing around with it until it kind of sounded good, and then Ozzy started running against the wall with his hands behind his head like this, like an airplane, smashing his head against the wall. He had to go to hospital. He had like whiplash at the end of the night. It was such a funny night.
Some strange times.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of maybe added to making the record better. I'm not sure. It was a funny atmosphere.
So, what were your influences when you started playing?
Hank Marvin. Yeah. That's all there was, you know. I mean, really, I loved the Shadows so much. I just loved his sound, and I still love it actually. I still love his echoes and his touch. And I was really lucky to meet him a few years ago, and we did this thing for Fender down at Wembley, and he was there, and he was a great guy to hang out with, and he stayed all day and watched everybody rehearse. He didn't leave after he'd done his, but he stayed all day. And he was like a big kid. He was like me. He was going, "So what kind of picks do you use? What kind of strings do you use?" It was just like typical guitar sort of conversation, like when you meet another guitarist. And he was such a great guy to hang out with, and I was like, and he played like Wonderful Land, and I was nearly in tears because it was the first tune I ever learned. Oh, wow. And he played it, and I was just standing there watching. It was like, oh, it was really moving, you know, to hear him play it again. Thanks. Yeah, he was great. And then, you know, there wasn't much, you know, until The Beatles came after that, really. I loved George Harrison. I used to learn all his solos and stuff, like A Hard Day's Night, which was a really very technically difficult for its time. It was quite fast for that sort of era. And the Run Down and Help, that was really hard to learn, where they go, will you please help me? And that was really, really hard to learn. It took me weeks to learn that. And then he went on the London Palladium and played it all wrong. And he told me years later that he only had one Gretsch, and the roadie put the strings under the thing instead of over it. And so he couldn't play it properly. He was all out of tune and everything. And all the kids at school going, did you see the Beatles last night? They were crap. It was like really weird. And so, but it was great. He actually, when I got to know him years and years later, he told me that story. And then after that, it was the British blues thing. So when I was 13 or so, I went round to a friend's house on a Sunday afternoon, and he played me the Blues Breakers with Eric Clapton, and that just changed my life in an instant. That was it for me. That's all I really wanted to do after that. When I heard that guitar sound, because that was the first time anyone had heard a Les Paul through a Marshall, just the Blues Breaker combo. And Eric's incredible, passionate playing, where he was, you know, he was 21, he was showing the world what he was made of. He came... I mean, I don't know how he got so far so quickly, because he was in the Yardbirds before and he wasn't anything like that. And all of a sudden, you know, you had this guy who was the best guitarist in the world. He just came out of John Mayall's house. He'd be sitting there for months and just like working and working and working. And he worked so hard at it, he just became the best. So when I heard that, that blew me away. And I borrowed the record off the guy because I couldn't afford to buy it. And I had it for about 6 months. I think when he got it back, there was nothing left of it. You know, it was like, so I used to come home from school every day and sit there and try and learn all the solos. Like a lot of people of my age, my generation, I think that was like the record that really turned them on to great guitar playing. And then after that, you had Jeff Beck with the Yardbirds, who was incredible. I loved all that Shapes of Things and all that Eastern stuff he was doing, because he was a real sound, sonic kind of innovator at the time. And then you had Jimi Hendrix after that, who just came and blew everybody out of the water. It was like, even on the first album, he kind of did everything he was going to do. He did on that first record, I experienced, and you know, that was
it was an amazing, but at the time, wasn't it, when he came over and did his show, it was something that nobody had seen before, wasn't it?
It's incredible. I mean, like, when you heard that first album, it was like, where's this guy come from? You know, like another planet or something. It was like, but the thing was, you know, when you're that age, only 13 or 14 yourself, you're so impressionable anyway. So it makes an even bigger impression on you than if you were, say, 21 or something. Yeah. So it really, you know, it just got right inside me, all that music. And so I'd sit down and I would learn to play like him then. And I think all those guys, you know, that I grew up with, I mean, because you only had about 4 guitarists then, really, of any real worth, you know. There was a lot of guys who couldn't really play, but you had Peter Green, you had Jeff Beck, you had Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton. To me, they were the guys. So my style is kind of a combination of all of that put together, and then a bit of me in there as well, really.